Good afternoon and welcome to Fridays at 1. I'm Leslie Herman, co-chair with Ruth Mackaman of this program. It's a program 3 times a semester of the Lifelong Peer Learning Program, or LP Squared, at the CUNY Graduate Center. Fridays at 1 is a public program open to community of CUNY and to the general public. Today, we're fortunate to have Navina Najat Haidar with us. She is the curator in charge of the Department of Islamic Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Dr. Haidar received her doctorate from Oxford University and has curated and written numerous catalogs for exhibitions and created them, including Sultans of Deccan, India, Opulence and Fantasy. She was the coordinator of the New Islamic Galleries project, which opened at the Met in 2011, which included the installation of more than 1,000 objects from Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and India, as well as the more recent renovation of the galleries last year. She has an upcoming exhibition planned for 2024 on Jahangir, the 17th century Mughal ruler of India and great patron of the arts. Just as an aside, his son was the person who created the Taj Mahal, to put it in context. Today, Dr. Haidar will talk about the making of the Islamic galleries and will take us on a virtual tour that will give us a window not just into Islamic art, but a look at how curators think about organizing space and how exhibitions are planned to entice and educate viewers. And finally, she will treat us to a special project she has developed with Iran called the Speaking Object to bring calligraphy to life. Stay tuned, just wait till you hear this. Please put your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and Navina will answer them when she's done her talk. So please welcome Navina Haidar.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be with all of you today. I'm really grateful for the invitation and for the opportunity to share the work we've been doing at the Metropolitan Museum. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. It's just going to take me a minute. Just going to do that once more. Sorry, just going to do that once more. Okay. Sorry, all these formalities take a minute. So great. I hope you can see my screen well, and just to indicate to me if there's a problem. So I'm introducing our collections and our work through the title of the idea of the Arts of Islam at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. As I often have to explain, this idea of Islamic art or arts of Islam is something that needs sometimes needs a bit of explanation or demands explanation, and sometimes flows quite easily with people who understand what is meant by the focus primarily on the arts of the Middle East, northern and parts of southern India, and North Africa, primarily being the main part of the collection from the 7th to the 19th century onwards. But also expanding and growing into a global expression that goes beyond the central Islamic lands and those particular regions. And so it's both a kind of wide global kind of idea as well as a very focused idea, depending on the collections that you're really talking about. Now, the collections of Islamic art at the Met have grown in, as the museum has grown. they, early collectors and early contributors to the museum were interested in material from these regions, the Central Islamic lands, and have uh, been, sort of gifting or acquiring those works for the museum from the very beginning. And you can see on the left of the screen the museum in about 1880, when it looks just like a kind of grand establishment on the edge of an open ground, which is to later become Central Park. And then the Met today on the right-hand side, where you have this massive edifice going down Fifth Avenue, with many, many galleries and over 2 million objects on display in those spaces within. The Met has evolved into a kind of extraordinary institution and is now one of five or six, you would say, so-called universal museums, in that they are able to show the artistic heritage of humanity from almost any culture, any moment in time, all under one roof. That is a tremendous privilege and responsibility, and also something that is coming under pressure today as the whole notion of globalization and global dialogue evolves and is in some ways contested. So coming to our collections, I mean, we take great pleasure in looking at these old photographs from the archives, because we recognize objects that are practically old friends to us. The circumstances and settings and nomenclature have changed, but the objects are kind of fixed points in our museum story. On the left, the Persian room, the so-called Persian room in 1912, displays a collection of late Persian glass from the Qajar period, those beautiful swan-shaped, swan-necked bottles in brilliant colors, along with Indian wooden architectural elements and carpets, Safavid carpets from an earlier period in Iran. So kind of mixing up, not being too careful to separate on a kind of nationalistic or cultural basis these different places, something that is done now. But at the same time, it's quite nice to look into a kind of pre-national world when empires sort of reigned supreme and borders were much perhaps more fluid. The Moore collection in 1907 on the right has some beautiful and important mosque lamps from the Mamluk period, gilded and enameled mosque lamps, as well as other types of glass from Iran and other places in the Middle East that were included. Leslie mentioned enticing exhibitions, which is a wonderful way to think of them, because I think we are always trying to entice visitors to experience works of art in new ways. And this is not a new idea, because back in 1933, they tried something quite radical, which wouldn't be allowed today by all the forces of new understanding of conservation science and so on, which is to actually introduce live plants in the exhibition with the art. So we have an exhibition from 1933 called Plant, Form and Ornament, and this actually has water, has a display of plants, and then has works of art from the Ottoman, Indian, Persian, basically the later Islamic empires, along with, you can see, arms and armor of European origin. So really mixed up display of objects, but the idea being to show the transmigration of floral motifs, the adaptation of floral motifs from nature into works of art. And you can see that in the Ottoman plate on the right, which is shown photographed with fresh carnations, to show you exactly how the profile of the carnations on the dish itself have been executed, how they've interpreted the real plants. In 1963, the Islamic department itself was born. And this was a very important recognition, a moment of origin for our existence, at least at the Met. And it was an interesting moment because it was the sort of recognition in the United States that the idea of Islam used as a lens to look at the cultures of the Middle East from the 7th to the 19th or early 20th century, that was the parameter at the time, was a legitimate and interesting and scholarly way to approach this material. And in 1975, Richard Ettinghausen, who was a great figure on the East Coast, he was a scholar from Germany who came to the United States and was very had a great impact at Princeton University, New York University's Institute of Fine Arts, and the Metropolitan Museum, where he held positions. He was really the great intellectual force that created the 1975 Galleries of Islamic Art at the Met. And this was, in its time, a very exciting and influential installation inserted within the kind of neoclassical structure of the wing that was built by McKim, Mead and White, was a kind of geometric insert that created a space filled with hexagonal or half hexagonal shaped display cases, tall panels upon which carpets were shown, and leaning decks upon which pages of painted folios were shown, indicating that they were not European in origin or to be put in a frame and viewed vertically on a wall, but leaning back to evoke the context of the original book from which they came. So this whole aesthetic approach, as well as commitment to the idea of a unified a unified Islamic world, which was in cultural dialogue across a huge geography and with cultures outside it, but was bound together by artistic, cultural, political, and historic traditions. Was a legitimate and exciting way to look at all of this. And of course, it happily coincided with the oil boom. So that also helped, I think. But this was 1975, and when I joined the museum in 2000, in about 2000, I was told that we are going to take down those epic galleries and redo them for 2000 and for the next 10 years. That's how I spent my early curatorial years at the museum, and we opened them in 2011 and have recently updated them again in 2021, 22, just this last year and this current year, because we have to keep up with changes in our field and new interpretations of the material as well, and new ambitions in the space. When the New York Times reviewed what we'd done, they had great appreciation for the work that unfolded, because the galleries were much larger than they had been. They were much more open and interconnected than they had been, and they weren't offering anymore a singular argument or a singular point of view about Islam as a kind of grand edifice, but really multiple narratives through which Islam was more integrated in the history of the world. It still hangs together as a kind of idea that unites certain unites these histories and is deeply informed by the traditions of Islam itself, the art of these various places. But it also accepts that Islam is now a global tradition that goes beyond the central Islamic lands, that the story is, especially after the 9/11 attacks in New York City, the storyline must contain ways of accessing, of interaction, of exchange. These are very important themes when we think of the arts of the Islamic world, or we think of the Islamic world. So we opened up the space. We had multiple narratives. We had multiple ways that you could walk through this kind of roundabout space. And this is actually an image that the New York Times produced, giving an explanation of how you could walk through the spaces. So you can see that we are located above the Roman court below. There's a kind of central area around the Roman court, which has galleries with lower ceilings. And then there's a sort of outer half circle, or like an L-shaped group of galleries with higher ceilings. And the physicality of the space is very important to a curator and to designers when you're actually putting objects in them, because somehow you have to make the objects marry sit well in the space. You have to make your storylines and all your narratives work in that space as well. And you have to kind of be sensitive to the architectural legacy of we try to be of McKim, Mead and White, and rather than fighting it and sort of conflicting it with it, we found meeting points between the neoclassical proportions and the kind of architectural references that we wanted to pull out from the Islamic tradition. And so at many points we kept we hung on to proportions, room sizes, doorway sizes, but we changed the detailing in certain key ways. So I think the result seemed to please most people, and certainly the New York Times is very generous in saying that we had managed to achieve a narrative and an experience that was free from essentialization, from reductivism, and really opened up a kind of global view into the Islamic tradition. Now, one of the things we did, we worked with, we've gone into the brave new world of Instagram and social media, embraced it, and we do quite a lot with media now. And for our opening, we created with Yo-Yo Ma and other partners, we created a little walk through the gallery with a beautiful musical composition that I'd like to share with you, and will give you a sense of what the galleries feel like when you're actually in those spaces. I hope you were able to hear the sound and the music, and you can always catch up with that film on our Instagram anytime. So I would just like to really now give you a little insight into some of the thinking in a little more detail in some areas. This is our introduction gallery, which is a space where we now offer this global view of Islam. We've integrated new objects in here, and from this space, which really talks about the formation of Islam, the rise of Islam in the 7th century, its early artistic traditions, which really involved the all-important art of calligraphy related to the formation of the Holy Book, the Quran, which for Muslims is the word of God as revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, and the foundation of all sort of aesthetic or major aesthetic ideas in this early period. And for artists, maybe the greatest privilege and the greatest prestige associated with the arts of calligraphy, therefore. Two, the nature of Islam itself as an aniconic tradition where there is no image associated with God, and by extension, images of other sacred figures generally don't appear in sculpture. They sometimes appear in illustrated manuscripts. It's not true that there's an express injunction against the production of images in Islam, but certainly it is an aniconic tradition in terms of its religious center. And therefore, images, when they do appear, tend to play a decorative or a functional role. Either they're associated with the use of scientific equipment or scientific ideas, such as the personification of planets and so on in scientific illustrations, or they appear as fantastical creatures, symbolic creatures from in carpet design, and as I mentioned, sometimes in book illustration when the book is actually talking a text with a historical text or poetic text is being illustrated. In this gallery, we start with this beautiful bowl, which I'm going to show you a little bit more about later, because we've actually come up with a new way of animating the calligraphy and explaining its content through a new digital feature, which I'll be sharing in a bit. But this gallery offers you two routes. If you go right, which is the way we're going to go, you follow the Umayyads, the first dynasty of Islam, as they spread eastward and conquered the Sasanians, the last pre-Islamic dynasty of Iran, and west, but you could also follow them westward, as you can see straight ahead, when the Umayyads moved westward across Syria and Egypt, expelling what was left of the Byzantines in that region, so really conquering in that direction and diffusing across North Africa and into Spain, bringing 8 centuries of Islam to Spain. And that's what's visible through the door. So you have the two options, and that's sort of what I mean by multiple narratives. You don't have to just go one way. You can explore history and the collections in other ways. I mentioned the importance of the Quran and its central place in the artistic traditions and in the kind of aesthetic traditions of the Islamic world. But it's not, and actually one of the things that we have right in the beginning is a display case with some of our most important Quran folios. You're looking at the big page that you're looking at on the back wall there is actually what was actually thought to be the world's earliest Quran. It's a single page from a Quran manuscript. It was thought to be the world's earliest Quran when it was first discovered by the Russians in Uzbekistan, and it's known as the Tashkent Quran. But since then, other fragments that are earlier in date have appeared or been identified and are being worked on now. But certainly it is one of the early examples from datable to the 8th century, executed on animal skin, on vellum. And in this style, which is known as Kufic, where the letters are a square-based style, then you find that a lot in the early architecture as well. So other great examples of Qurans are included in this display, including our latest acquisition, which you see on the screen as well. That is a Quran manuscript from sub-Saharan Africa, from Western Africa, the western part. It's attributed either to Chad or to Nigeria. And you can see that the calligraphy there is also in a kind of a Kufic style, a variant of the Kufic style, in some ways really expressing the preservation of this very early style in the scriptoriums of West Africa much, much later. Above on the screen, you see another new acquisition that we're very proud to put out, and that really helps us show how Islam and Islamic traditions artistically have spread way beyond the central Islamic lands, because those two beautifully woven hats were created in South Sulawesi in Indonesia, where the Buganese people, who in part converted to Islam, used to weave these, and these are associated with pilgrimage to the Holy Lands. The black one would have been worn before pilgrimage, the white one would have been worn after pilgrimage. And these headdresses have been created with very delicate and elegant woven gold and fibers, including orchid fibers, we're told. And in the black one, you can actually see that there's a kind of pseudo calligraphy which has been woven into the design, and that is also in a kind of a Kufic. We plan to introduce in this introduction gallery the works of living artists. I mean, the contemporary tradition now, we're talking about artists in diaspora, we're talking about artists around the world who may or may not engage with their own personal identity or with the wider traditions of Islam. But there's room for all of that diversity in our introduction gallery now. We're still working on this kind of display area and hoping that we can put this into fruition very soon. And one of the artists who we are very excited to be engaging with is the great printmaker Muhammad Omer Khalil, who was born in Khartoum in Sudan and has a great output of prints. we are going to be showing his memory of one of the hometowns that he visited, Sawak, in 1965, and the mosque there, through this incredible technique of printmaking, where he is famous for layering black upon black upon black in such a skillful manner that the lightest layer actually turns into light rather than darkness. So it's a brilliant printmaking technique that we'll be sharing. Among the other contemporary artists and artworks that we hope to be showing are works such as the ones that you see on the screen, examples of contemporary calligraphy, and the link through the work of the artist Pilaram, and through the work of the artist Siti, we see a reference to a kind of Abbasid period structure that is very important, one of the early minarets of Islam. So now let's follow our way through the galleries. We're going to go eastward, where we see that the Sasanian Empire and the arts of the Sasanian Empire and those styles, and the arts of the West, sort of late antique West, come together in the Umayyad period, which is quite a melting pot of styles. And you can see that many of these styles actually continue the language, the visual language of late antiquity, while at the same time introducing many new things. So the new things, essentially, you could say, are to do with styles of architecture and the Quran, early styles of Quranic calligraphy, which we display in the gallery. But we are also able to display works of art such as these works, which are quite fascinating examples of artworks from the 9th century from Egypt and Yemen. Up above, the broad band that you see of inlaid decoration is actually one of 6 such large inlaid and overlaid wooden panels. It hasn't been completely determined what the function of these panels were. There are many theories about them, one of them being that large oversized boxes of great beauty were created in order to house the early multi-volume versions of the Quran, which would have had a great presence in the early mosques. That's just one suggestion. But you can see that the inlay and overlay work, which has been created by small pieces of wood, ivory, and bone gathered together to create these designs, really integrates those 2 elements that I've been talking about, one being the kind of Sasanian legacy and the other one being the late antique Western legacy, because you have these kind of classical arches with winged forms that seem to be above the capitals. Those recall the kind of Sasanian style. At the very center, you have an inlaid section that looks like a Roman period floor mosaic with a sort of Hellenistic vine leaf right in the middle with little sort of vines. And also within those arches, you see a very interesting pattern, a sort of a zigzaggy pattern, which resembles ikat, the ikat technique of weaving, if you know that technique at all. And on the right-hand side below, you see that I am actually showing you a piece of ikat weaving, which survives from Yemen in the 9th century, and sort of matches the inlay design that you see on the left. Interesting, because it seems like those inlays within the arches could really possibly be indicating curtains or textile designs of some kind, very sort of stylized and abstracted. The interesting thing about the ikat is that the threads are actually dyed before they are woven. And so the design that you see, this very elegant design, is practically in the DNA of the textile. It's not an applied design, but it's a woven design. And it requires a great mastery of the loom, and is often accompanied by applied design as well. The Umayyads themselves were overthrown in the year 750 by a revolution at their court and ushered in the so-called Abbasid age, and we have a gallery for the Abbasids. The Abbasids lasted from 750 to 1258 as the caliphs, and the caliphs were they would displace themselves in 1258 by the Mongol invasion, which is a kind of great important historic change and had a huge impact on the arts. But we're really able to present the medieval world before the Mongols through the collection, which is very rich. Here you have the so-called bevel style of architecture, which you see displayed through architectural elements, wall panels, wooden elements, and also fragments of glass and ceramic that survive, displaying this enigmatic and distinctive style of abstracted natural decoration, relief carved decoration that became characteristic of the Abbasid capital at Samarra, which is where these excavated materials come from, most of them. We also have a reconstruction of an entire 10th century room from a site called Sabzpushan in Nishapur in Iran. And we're able to show the panels that came from this room in relationship to an archival photograph of the room itself in situ. So you can see how barren that landscape is, and how that vegetal decoration inside the room sort of creates an image, a reflection, let's say, of a paradisical garden. Very important to remember that for Muslims, paradise is a garden. And perhaps when we look at that landscape, we can see why that lush green vision was so cherished. Among the kind of stars from the medieval age, we have this great bronze lion, which is an incense burner. And you can actually put the incense inside the body of this incense burner, and this fragrant smoke would emerge from the piercings which cover the entire body of this piece. So it would be a very lively piece, not just for its sparkling personality, which you see right here with its big ears and open grin, but the actual curling fragrant smoke that would have been all around it must have been, one of the projects I would love to do in the future is to create it, to use the technique of 3D printing to create a 3D reproduction of this piece, and then actually light the incense in there and see how it would have actually worked. On the right, you have a chess set, which is technically, I believe, the world's earliest complete chess set. To be honest, it's missing one piece, but we don't confess to that very often. It is pretty much complete, and it's a very rare example of the game of chess from Sabzpushan, from that same site that we excavated. And it shows the form of chess before it touched, it was influenced by Europe, before the queen, before the bishop, and before the black and white. All those things came when the game reached Europe, when the queen replaced the vizier, when the bishop replaced the elephant, and when they had access to African ivory and to jet, giving rise to the black and white chess set of today. This is an early version of it. In the Gallery for Medieval Iran and Central Asia, we're able to actually connect to the Orientalism Gallery of European art next door, and able to show the connection between painters who were fascinated by the Middle East and portrayed it in different sorts of studies, such as the one that you see by the artist Jerome, known as The Prayer in the Mosque. And then you can step right next door into our galleries, where you can actually be in those, with the objects of that period. It's a very nice dialogue to be able to open up. And it's also interesting because there's been a lot of conversation now ever since Edward Said's influential book, particularly Orientalism, where the circumstances of the image making in 19th century Europe is being discussed within the question of colonialism, the authority, the colonial gaze, etc. And even images such as this, which is an example of academic painting, where the artist observed would have done an observation of the interior and then inserted figures from other sources, including his studio, into the picture. That whole sort of fabrication of narrative is being sort of discussed right now quite energetically. The post-Mongol world that followed in is a kind of huge change in the Middle East when it comes to the art, a huge change in the world actually when it comes to the art, because it essentially represents the meeting of China and Islam in the Middle East, and gave rise to successive dynasties of the Mongol age. And we are able to create a set of a gallery space for this post-Mongol Iran and Central Asia, and this is part of that space. And from this world of the post-Mongol Iran and Central Asia, which was very important, especially for the book arts, we are able to then lead you into the sort of last three empires of the Muslim world, the so-called gunpowder empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals of India. So for the Ottoman world, we have a whole kind of big wing. Practically, it's three large spaces. The central one that you're looking at is the gallery for the Ottoman, for the Ottoman court at Istanbul, and all the sort of centers that served it in one sense. Iznik, that produced incredible ceramics, Bursa, that produced incredible textiles, all to be absorbed and designed in some sense by this powerful Ottoman court that both absorbed all of these influences, but also disseminated them in a very powerful stylistic idiom that went across the reaches of the Ottoman Empire, which we must remember is one of the world's largest empires, based in Istanbul, with the Anatolia, parts of Eastern Europe, the whole of the Eastern Mediterranean, and much of North Africa. This huge empire was knitted together not just through political forces, but also through the language of art, because there was this kind of incredible Ottoman style that sort of went through all of these regions. And you can see examples of that in the gallery here, including my favorite dragon, which is a wonderful, lively dragon created in a strong calligraphic line by one of the great masters of Iran, who actually came to the Ottoman court, Shah Quli. We have adjoining this gallery a space for carpets and textiles for the wider Ottoman world, including Egypt, which they conquered in about 1516. And this is shown under this glorious ceiling, which was actually made in Spain in the 16th century. Resonates beautifully with the carpet designs, the strong geometric medallions that you see everywhere, the kind of language of celestial imagery, which is something that is very also characteristic of what we think of as Islamic art from almost all places and all times. Among the treasures that you'll see in this gallery is this very rare carpet, which is a carpet that was dated to the 14th century, possibly the early 15th, but I think the late 14th century. It's one of three surviving carpets in the world with this very interesting design. And if you look at it, you'll see that it's animals within animals, sort of confronting animals within animals. And this was actually identified on the basis of a Sienese painting, which shows the same carpet. And that really speaks to the kind of popularity of these Oriental carpets in Europe as a big item of trade. We also have the much loved Damascus room in this area, which is a whole period room from 18th century Damascus, Syria being a province of the Ottomans in the 18th century. And Damascus, of course, having a long legacy of art and culture. And this room kind of brings together a lot of those elements. And we are doing a new program with an artist, a singer who's from Damascus, and is actually putting all the poetry that you see in the room to song. And so one of the new programs and one of the kinds of things that we try to do is to create a artistic link between this room and other aspects of the collection and living artists today. We'll keep you posted about that. It's in development right now, and it's going to be very beautiful. The Safavid court was so Iran after the has many, many phases of art, and it's so central in its importance to what happens around it. The influence of Persian styles goes all the way across Asia, and in part because of the Persian language, which became the kind of literary language of the Eastern Islamic world. Um, and had great influence all through, especially in South Asia and India. And so this room is kind of filled with treasures from the Safavid period and this first early capitals at Tabriz, all the way to the later capital at Isfahan. And then we have later material as well from the Qajas, the Zand, the Afsharid, the Zand, and the Qajar periods, which you can see on the right. On the left, those large tile panels, I don't know if you can make out, actually include European figures, because one of the other great things that happens at the end of the 15th century is the opening up of the connections between Europe and Asia, thanks to the voyages of Vasco da Gama. And you begin to see a European presence in Asia much more, and European figures begin to emerge in the works of art from this world as well. I say the other great thing because what I had in my mind that I should have mentioned, of course, earlier is that we talked about 8 centuries of Islam in Spain. Well, at the end of the 15th century, we know that that ended in the expulsion of Jews and Muslims from Spain. And that has had a huge impact on the perception of that historical moment and all that follows in history. I mean, I kind of are very much related, all that preceded, all that followed. And then you also have in those last 10 years of the 15th century, the discovery of the New World. And somehow all of these things are connected and really give rise to the early modern period, which is why it's now called the early modern period, as opposed to the late medieval period, which is what it used to be called when I was a student, but has been sort of reclassified. This whole idea of connectivity and interaction is something that you see, for example, in works of art that we've put together. Um, on the right, you see a kendi, which is a kind of a vessel from the Ming period in China. It's a zoomorphized vessel with an elephant head. And on the left-hand side, you see a kendi from Iran, which is clearly modeled on the Chinese example. And that whole dialogue between objects as they move around between cultures is very much interwoven in the galleries, and part of the way that we approach this idea of Islam in dialogue, of countries and cultures and artists in dialogue, by placing objects together, by relating them across silos of different types to be able to tell multiple stories of connection and exchange. If you'd come down the other way to the western end, followed the Umayyads as they went into the west, you would have found your way through those 8 centuries of Islam in Spain in a gallery that sort of in an extension of that gallery that is the Moroccan court. This very charming little court has been created by artisans from Morocco, and you can see that they're doing their work. It's a place where we display, we keep changing the display. At the moment, we have a couple of objects there from sub-Saharan Africa, including a window from Mali. We also have objects such as the capital that you see up on top, which is from Madinat al-Zahra, which is an important center from the Umayyad period in Spain. And the idea here is to really show and connect up this Andalusian world, pre-Andalusian world, this world that extends not just in Spain and North Africa, but has great resonance and exchange with West Africa as well. And there's a close-up of some of those objects. And we end our gallery tour with coming to the Indian galleries. We have 2 spaces for Mughal India, and the Mughal age in India was one where well, India in general and South Asia in general is one which is an incredibly hybrid period where you have 1,000 years of rule, Muslim courtly rule, but 75% of the country or the culture remains not, coexists with vibrant other traditions, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, etc. So the interesting thing is that you have this kind of incredibly hybrid plurality expressing itself over a very long period of time, pre-Mughal actually, because the sultanates that existed for 300 years before the Mughals came, were the foundation of Islamic rule or courtly rule in India. But as I said, we really try to think of this period as very, very mixed and diverse. And so we do not separate this late, later South Asia on the basis of religion. Rather we show it all together. So here you have a gallery for mainly our Sultanate, Deccani, Mughal courtly collections, including that fantastic carpet that was probably made for Akbar the Great's city palace in Fatehpur Sikri. And then in an adjoining room, we have paintings from different Islamic and Rajput and Punjab hill courts. And on the right, you see an image of the Emperor Aurangzeb. And on the left, you see an image from the Punjab hills, which shows the Indian god Shiva playing a courtly game of dice with his consort. So that is just really my introduction to, my overview of the, flavor of the galleries. You can, if you're all in New York, we'd love to welcome you to the galleries anytime. I want to end my talk today by showing you some of the new media projects we've been working on. And the media projects, we're very excited about them because, well, for 1 week, we reclaim Islam's leading position as technocrats from the medieval age, because actually the medieval age is one where Muslim cultures really advanced scientific science and in so many different ways. So we're taking our inspiration from our own tradition, so to speak. But also we were able to work with a group in Iran, especially somebody named Muhammad Farsi Madan and his team in the University of Ardabil, who were led by somebody named Dr. Guchani, who sadly passed away in COVID, but was a great, dear colleague of ours, moving between Iran and the US. And despite all the obstacles and all the visa problems and the funding issues and the bad sort of um, politics in the way, we were able to join hands with our Iranian scholars and create something really wonderful, which is on the topic of calligraphy and is a way of digitally animating the calligraphy and giving voice to it. So we call it the Speaking Object Project. And we look at objects such as the one on your screen here, which is a tombstone. And if you didn't know that every bit of that tombstone was covered with some kind of calligraphy, you might just think it's some kind of ornamental design. But actually, there are many extraordinary styles of readable calligraphy on this tombstone. And it is just one of many, many objects that are devoted to the art of calligraphy and show you the mastery of calligraphy as an art form in the Muslim world. I'm going to show you one piece which actually doesn't belong to our collection, but we're working on it for our colleagues in Doha. And this comes from, let me see, I'll just open this up. This is the image of a horse that was produced in the Deccan region of India, South Central Plateau region of India in the late 16th or early 17th century. The horse itself has been created through the formation of calligraphy, and the motif of a horse was important to this region because this region was devoted to Shiism, and Shiism celebrates a lot of the traditions of of the Prophet's family is centered in part on the Battle of Karbala, where the Shiites, many of the important Shiite leaders were martyred. And one of the great heroes of that battle is a horse, the horse of the Imam Ali. So that may be one of the reasons why the horse motif is so important. But here it has been fashioned into a beautiful verse from the Quran itself. And this is the throne verse from the Quran. So I'm going to play it for you here and you'll get a sense of what we're doing with this project.
Navina, the screen is blank.
Oh, you mean you didn't see it? You mean you were not able to see it?
No, we haven't been able to see it.
Oh, that's so disappointing. I thought you heard the whole thing. Okay, let
Put
me
it
try.
back on.
Okay, let me know if this works because this would be very sad if you can't see it. Can you see? Can you see this?
No.
Oh, it says my screen sharing is paused. I don't know why. All right, let me try again. It worked when we did it, so let me try it with this. Can you see this? Okay, this was very, do you mind if I try again? Because I really, can you?
Please try again, sure.
All right. Well, because this is just such a lovely thing, I really want you to see it. Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, and can you hear as well? I'm going to play it for you now.
الله لا
Yes.
إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يئوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم.
صاحبهی میر صاحب مشق کمترین
Okay, so I hope you saw that. Can you confirm you saw that?
Yes.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. Okay, good. Well, this is a very difficult thing to do because to actually undertake this project, we have to have someone who can read every letter of it and transcribe it and highlight it digitally so that you can read along with it. Even if you can't actually read it, you get the sense of every single word and letter. somebody to recite it, somebody to animate the whole thing. So offering that recitation, the transcription, the translation in this kind of a sandwich, so that very smoothly the whole object becomes understandable in a new way and speaks out, is what this project is all about. Now that one horse picture was one exception that I wanted to show just you, but we have a page now. I'm going to hope that this works out, that you can see on the Met's website. And this is the speaking objects from the world of Islam. You can actually go to this web page and you'll see that we have a little history of this, and we have just 4 objects. That's all we could manage before the revolution hit us. But we're hoping to do more, to be able to. We've just laid the foundations for this project, but it opens up a whole new incredible space for us to do much more. Let's look at this inscribed pen box, which is inscribed with both Arabic and Persian calligraphy. And when you understand and go along with the letters and read and understand what the inscriptions are all about, the full metaphorical potential of this box comes out. You understand that the letters and the poems are chosen for the box because they relate to both the box's function and the box's form as a pen box which would have contained a quill and ink and elements with which you would have been able to write a letter to the beloved.
لصاحبه السعادة والسلام وطول العمر ما ناحت حمام أبدا سرمدا إلى يوم القيامة دوامة له العز والإقبال والظفر ما طلعت الشمس والقمر وطلالة بدوام دمع بخير گشاید مبادا نیاز از خون دل نوشتم نزدیک یار نامه إني رأيت دهرا من هجرك القیامه سر ز خطت بر ندارم چون قلم گر سرم برداری از تن چون دوات عاقبت خیر باد.
I hope you enjoyed that one. Leslie, were you able to hear that?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So I will leave you all to explore these ones yourself, but let me play another one to you, because the majesty of the Quran is really what's at the heart of this and so much of the inscriptional information that you find on objects. It is stirring to hear the beauty of the words, the power of the recitation, and to understand that the very shapes that you're looking at are made from letters that have been turned into symbolic motifs.
فسيكفيكهم الله وهو السميع العليم.
عمل حسن بن علي بن أحمد بابا بيك البناء.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم.
Well, I hope that one spoke for itself, so to speak. It's
It did. It
yeah.
did.
It's incredible, actually, what a teaching tool this is turning out to be, because you can follow every letter with it, and it becomes a way to unscramble all of that decoration into legibility. Now, one of the ones that was very hard to do was actually, since we're on together, I might as well share this one with you. This is the Tughra, or the royal ensign of the ruler Suleiman the Magnificent, who was the great ruler of the greatest figure of the Ottoman Empire. He died in 1566, and he had many grand titles. And it was, very hard to explain how grand his titles were without, and what they meant without the aid of this technology that we've developed.
سلیمان شاه ابن سلیم شاه خان المظفر دائما. نشان شریف عالی شأن سامی مکان سلطانی و طغرای قرای اقبال نمای و سعادت فزای و جهان ستان خاقانی نفذوا بالعون ربانی و الصون صمدانی و المن سبحانی. حکمی اولدر.
That was a great triumph, because Suleiman's status and the role of the Ottomans as protectors of the Holy Land is something very important to understand, with the idea of the legitimacy of the ruler, and what is the caliph, what is the ruler, the sultan, and what is his jurisdiction and his authority. That all comes out in those titles when you look at them closely. Okay, we might as well end on the last one. Since we've looked at 3 of them, I might as well share the last one, because it gives us very good advice for the rest of our lives and weekends, certainly going forward, because it's a proverb in the Arabic language, but put on a bowl that was made in Iran. What's interesting about proverbs is that they don't exist in formal texts. There's very little place where you can actually encounter a proverb from the 10th century. But there is this class of ceramics which has these kind of informal bits of advice, proverbs, and little sayings and phrases that have existed through 1,000 years ago, and they're preserved in this media. So let's see what this bowl wants to tell us.
التدبير قبل العمل يؤمنك من الندم اليمن والسلامة.
Okay, so that bowl advises us to prepare before action to protect us from regret. So I think that's a great motto for us to maybe end our session on today. For me to say that I hope you visit the galleries, I hope you visit the website with that new program that we've put on. and to thank you for listening to me today and for allowing me to share some of the work that we've been doing at the Met. Thank you so much, and I wish everyone a very happy weekend ahead.
Thank you so much, Navina. That was thrilling. And we much appreciate it. We're going to go to the Islamic galleries and with a new understanding. So let's see, we've got some questions. From Carolyn, she wants to know, what is the place of calligraphic art in the world of Islamic art today? She has a special interest because she's helping to resettle a leading Islamic calligrapher in Connecticut named Ali Baba Arwangi, an Afghan refugee and his family.
So calligraphy is evolving today. It's sort of interesting because calligraphers are coming up with new styles, new ways of doing things with, like, let's say, digital or even sculptural forms. I mean, you know, as much of invention as there ever was exists today. However, you know, there is a great interest in people who are traditionally trained, because that requires a huge amount of training and discipline and understanding of all those styles, techniques, and methods that have evolved in history. So so I'd be happy to talk to you about this calligrapher. One of my colleagues has actually written a book on calligraphy. Dr. Mariam Ekhtiar, she would be a good person to advise on this. And of course, we are also helping with resettling some Afghan refugees. Our institution is very involved in that. So maybe we can talk offline about that. You feel free to reach out after the talk. And Leslie, feel free to share my email.
Okay, I will. Terrific, thank you. Linda said this is a beautiful and educational presentation, and she wants to know if there is a relationship between Chinese calligraphy and Islamic calligraphy. Did one influence the other?
Well, I mean, they're both great calligraphic arts, and there are meeting points between them because, for example, you do have styles of Islamic calligraphy in China, and a lot of the methodologies, the brush methodologies and the strokes and so on that have informed Chinese calligraphy sometimes come into play with Arabic calligraphy in China. So there are meeting points, but I don't know really if they influence each other. They come from sort of separate streams and, you know, interact rather than influence, I would say. I hope that helps.
Great, great, okay. And wants to know, how do you decide what kind of pronunciation and dialect to use in the Arabic narrations and readings?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's like a very important question for us, because Arabic is any language is complex. It's in terms of its pronunciation, ownership, legacy, etc. Arabic is a widely spoken language in different forms and accents and pronunciations across the Arab world itself. And outside the Arabic speaking world, it has a different kind of a life altogether. For example, people like me, who are from the Muslim community outside the Arab world, we don't speak it as a spoken language. It's memorized, the prayers are memorized, and we have local pronunciations which may not do justice to the beautiful original pronunciations, or maybe take them in a different direction, as may be the case. In our situation currently, we're working with a group of Iranians, and so their particular intonation is the one that you hear. The professor who I mentioned worked with us originally, Professor Guchani, who passed away, huge loss in COVID. Professor Guchani was of Iraqi origin and grew up then later in Iran. So he was a remarkable person who kind of transversed those two worlds. He knew Iraqi Arabic from Iraq from his youth very, very well as a scholar and as a kind of, you know, as just a member of society, and then also later on learned Persian. And he had this kind of mastery where he could both languages and very authentic accents and styles from those two contexts. But even so, those were his two contexts. I mean, you could go beyond that to Morocco or some other place and you'd have different kind of language pronunciation. So we are going at the moment, working with this group of students from Ardabil, this group of scholars. So that's whose kind of intonation is leading us.
That's so interesting. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to ask before we end? And Carolyn and Shelley, I will send you Navina's email so you can chat with her separately. Great. Well, thank you so much. This was really spectacular.
Thank you.
And it was lovely to have you.
Thank you so much.
We're all going to the Islamic galleries.
Sure, I'd be happy to welcome you. I can lead a tour anytime if you ever want to organize that for CUNY.
I sure do.
Yeah.
Excellent. We will organize it. I'm sure we will do that.
Leslie
Thank
and
you
Navina,
so
we have
much.
a few more questions.
Oh, sure.
If you don't mind, we have a question in the box if you would like to take.
Oh, sure. Oh, when you show the Indian galleries, sorry, I just read that out. How do you balance between the different religions?
Oh, okay.
So our focus is, not so much on the religions. It's more the courtly traditions. Because when you think of the art, we have to, our point of view is from the art. The artistic production was according to patronage, and the patrons were in different courts, and those courts were very much interacting with each other. So you have the Mughal courts, the Sultanate courts of the Deccan, the Rajput courts, the courts in the Punjab Hills. So our approach generally is on the basis of the courtly configurations rather than religious, because those courts were multi-religious places. The Mughal court had Hindus, Hindu artists, Hindu patrons, Hindu wives, Hindu princesses. The Mughals themselves were deeply intermarried with Hindu Rajputs. Conversely, the Rajput courts, like for example, the court at Bikaner in Rajput, the leading lights were a multi-generational family of Muslim artists who, with all their, although they were from a Muslim background, they were very, very knowledgeable about the Hindu traditions, and some of the great devotional Hindu subjects that were created at Bikaner were the work of Muslim artists, and vice versa at the Mughal court. So we don't really divide it up by religion. We really approach it through the courtly patronage system, and that allows for us to really sort of explore and present the evolution of the art stylistically, and the movement of artists and people across these courtly worlds. So I hope that helps.
Good. I think so. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you at the Met.
Thank you.